It is so nice to be back in Scotland. Absence really does make the heart grow fonder. Glorious, utterly glorious.
We're in Scotland in the rather attractive £111,000 Audi RS E-Tron GT. In case you're not aware, this is a pure battery electric vehicle with a 93.4 kilowatt-hour battery. And what's more,
this is the most powerful Audi RS ever produced. However, there is a slight caveat to that, because this has 590 brake horsepower most of the time. You get the headline 637 brake horsepower in 2.5 second bursts when you activate launch control and the associated boost mode. I think it might be one of the least used 47 brake horsepower ever, because really you use it, I don't know, how many times in your lifetime that you have this car? Probably half a dozen. Once when you first get it to try. Twice just to make sure it really was as uncomfortable as you thought. And then probably 4 times when you're showing friends that you probably don't particularly like and want to make feel uncomfortable. Now, as you probably know, this Audi is based on the same J1 platform as the Porsche Taycan, but as soon as you start driving it, you realise that this does have very much its own character. The GT part of the name is crucial, because the ride in this is just fantastic. Even on this RS's 21-inch wheels, it just has a lovely fluidity to it. Being the RS, it obviously has all the systems, so we've got rear wheel steer on this, we've got the slippy diff at the back, and yes, it seems to just have tons of grip and really sharp turning, and it feels very, very agile for such a big car, but it does reach a point. Unlike proper sports cars, which seem to get better the harder you drive them, this, yeah, once it starts to feel its weight, it really, really feels its weight. On the roads around here, I've actually been keeping the dampers in their dynamic setting, and the ride is still very, very good in dynamic, but you just need that extra firmness, that extra control, because over the lumps and bumps and crests here, otherwise it will scuff its nose.
the drivetrain is formed of a 238 brake horsepower motor on the front axle and a 456 brake horsepower motor on the rear axle. The front motor is driven through a single gear transmission, but like the Taycan, there is a 2-speed transmission on the rear axle. And this is a quattro system that's definitely not all about safety and traction, let alone understeer.
You can make this oversteer. I did actually earlier on today have it in ESC Sport, just out of interest really, I suppose, and it's surprisingly agile and it will move around. And when it does move around, again, it feels like a big car. Incidentally, they say that the quattro system in this reacts 5 times faster than a normal mechanical quattro system. It really does feel incredibly agile. That rear wheel steering doesn't just help you turn tightly in car parks, it makes the whole thing feel pretty nimble, and you really can drive it from the rear. However, in the same way that modern 911s can sometimes feel completely unrear-engined right up to the point where they do feel very rear-engined, this can feel surprisingly light and agile right up to the point where it feels very big and very heavy, and then it really does feel big and heavy. This being the RS model, as standard you get tungsten carbide coated iron brakes, and they're very good. When you hit the brake pedal, you can have up to 0.3 G of braking force before it will actually put pad to those tungsten carbide coated discs. The regen, we've got these paddles back here. I have to say a few times, it's a bit like, well, things you do in an EV when you're not used to driving EVs that often still. You press the start button when the car's already on, you guaranteed to do that quite a bit. And I cannot help but just come into a corner and then just click the left-hand pedal trying to change down, which does work in this because it just increases the regen, but I have to say still kind of not enough for my taste. I'd like it to do that even more. I have occasionally tried to upshift as well, but there we are. Why they don't just give us a manual option, I don't know. I jest. Having said that, actually discovered, I did some Taycan as well, put a water bottle in the cup holder there, suddenly third, fourth, fifth, braking for third, second, back up to third again. It's quite fun. And also then if you replace it with a heavier water bottle, a full water bottle, and you get a different gear shift feel, you see. Second, yeah, slightly more ponderous shift there, but just a bit more weighting to it, which is quite nice. So, yeah.
While we're talking about making EVs more engaging, I should probably mention sound. I tried the E-Tron GT's dynamic sound setting, and to be honest, it was a bit underwhelming. Audi claims to have done all sorts of research to create a unique sound for the car, but it is a bit generic EV to me.
I think they could have done more. I think this is one of the things that I feel with EVs, really the sound is one of the big criticisms that people have, sort of, oh, they don't sound sort of emotional. And I think they really can go to town with this much more. They can be much braver with these. Give people more options as well.
After all, you can always turn it off if you want to and just enjoy some of John Cage's finest work.
The interior of this is, well, it's quite surprising for all the fact that it's quite normal, actually. The interior of this could be really any other sort of large Audi. It really doesn't scream, I'm an EV. It's just a car, which is quite nice. Like the exterior, really. It's quite approachable. I like the fact we've obviously got physical buttons down here. We've got the big touchscreen up here, which looks very nice. Nice big chunky icons to touch on that. But yes, physical buttons down here. Yeah, it's a good interior without being particularly showy.
On the subject of the interior, it's worth mentioning that there is much more room for passengers in the back of an E-Tron than there is in a Taycan. I realise this is all getting a bit practical and this is meant to be an RS model, but to be honest, although it's undoubtedly quick enough and up to a point agile enough to warrant its little RS badge, the weight does tell. It seems to make more sense to me when viewed simply as a really fast GT. And that made me think we should test its Grand Tourer credentials properly. Can an EV with around 220 miles of realistic range be a GT? Will the charging network allow it? It requires investigation.
So, we are currently up in the Highlands. We're near Inverness. So we're going to see if we can go from Inverness all the way back down to the Midlands, to Milton Keynes to be precise, in a day, without any stress.
The next morning, after a good night's sleep, to make sure we were as zen as possible, we got up early and left quietly, heading predictably south.
We are an hour and 42 minutes into our journey, and we've done 93 miles and averaged 55 miles an hour, and more crucially 2.5 miles per kilowatt hour. So we've got a range of 132 miles left. It's been fine so far. It's obviously performing its GT duties very well. The A9 it's a beautiful road in some ways, but a very frustrating road in many ways as well, because, well, there are just lots and lots of average speed cameras just the whole way down it, and I recommend going over that way through the Cairngorms if you possibly can, if you've got the time, which we haven't today, but there we are. So we are about 19 miles away from Perth and our first stop. We obviously started with a full battery this morning, 218 miles of range that charged up overnight on the 22 kilowatt chargers outside the hotel, and we're heading for an Ionity charger. We're trying to plot our way down through the sort of the fast charging network, such as it is. So let's see, will it be working? Will it be up to full speed? Find out.
I did look at ZapMap and I also tried the Audi SatNav, but that wanted us to use a little charger for an hour and 40 minutes, so we ignored that and went with my manually plotted Google Maps plan. I also left the car in comfort mode rather than efficiency, because that seemed a more reasonable real-world test of its abilities. Anyway, after a couple of hours, we reached Perth.
First Ionity charging station, charging at 100 kilowatts. So we've got 7.5 kilowatt hours in there so far. Battery's up to 61%. 5 minutes. It's expensive though. Very expensive.
Now, I know there are schemes etc. that you can sign up to, but just rocking up to the Ionity chargers cost 58 pence per kilowatt hour, which at 2.7 miles per kilowatt hour means every mile costs 21.5 pence. If you assume a price of 135 pence per litre for unleaded and allow a motorway fuel economy figure of 29 mpg for a modern RS6 with cylinder deactivation, then you get an almost identical cost per mile of 21.1 pence, which is interesting.
Perth is now behind us and we're on our way to Gretna Green. We're trying to give ourselves sort of, I suppose, reasonable chunks. So that's another couple of hours, so it's generally a couple of hours, good for me to have a stop anyway, and it's not pushing our luck, I think it's fair to say. We don't really want to have the range anxiety, so although we could sort of stretch it further, this is designed to be relatively relaxing, sort of, we're not in a race or anything like that, so we'll see how that works out. Also just wanted to take a moment to point out that sort of over that way somewhere is Greenock, which is where James Watt was born. And it seems appropriate to mention that because that's obviously who the Watt was named after. He didn't discover it. It was just named after him.
Interesting, I think you'll agree. And to be honest, that was about as interesting as things got. I was rather hoping for some drama on the journey, maybe some chargers barely working, or all of them in use or out of order entirely, some nightmare to make the video exciting and leave you all on the edge of your seat. But we've got to say as we find. We stopped at Gretna Green, then Leeds, thoroughly recommended, good coffee, and then reached Milton Keynes, with an average of 2.7 miles per kilowatt hour. It was all much less of a kerfuffle than I was expecting. We noted that the Ionity chargers often feel like the poor relations because the mini substations that they require mean they're situated some way from the facilities with nary a bin for your rubbish, but overall there were simply no problems, with 100 to 150 kilowatts from each charger, meaning that a top-up gave you a nice 20 minutes to relax before heading off again. If anything, the enforced stop was actually nicer than simply rushing into a petrol station.
The problem is that it's not always like this. We've been lucky in terms of the plotting the route, and these charges have been pretty much where we wanted them in terms of sort of breaking up the journey into sort of 2.5 hour chunks. So there we are. Good today, can't always be like that. This is kind of what it should be like, and there just needs to be more charges like this to make it feasible really on longer journeys. Then there's the car.
It certainly has elements of an RS, but I maintain that this is better viewed simply as a fast, quiet, attractive GT, and to that end I'd have to recommend the RS's sibling, the considerably cheaper Audi E-Tron GT Quattro, which looks identical, still does 0 to 62 in 4.1 seconds, and rides even better thanks to smaller wheels. And as these are EVs, it's not even like you have to give up a V12 for a less characterful turbo V6 by going to the lesser model. Just as with Porsche's Taycan, it feels like less is actually more with the E-Tron GT.